Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being on our program. I'm Armando F. Sanchez. One of my executive persons here is on our show today. Cleo, ¿verdad, Cleo? Cleo is part of the family. She's here, and thank you for being on our show. Well, this is a really great time. 1969, this is a whole mess of years ago. 1969, I went to college. I landed in the middle of somewhere where I had no clue where I was, and that was in the Claremont Men's College in Claremont, California. And Francisco Vázquez to my right, he was one of the persons that greeted us there. And to see a familiar face, a Latino face, somewhere where it was totally brand new to me was really a comforting zone. And over the years, I've had the pleasure, the honor of meeting him and staying with him and calling him a friend. We traveled to Mexico a couple of times, and I stayed in the Sure Tales. I considered him to be one of the smartest persons I knew. He was going on through his bachelor's, his master's, and his Ph.D., and I just stayed right behind him, you know. And congratulations, you did your Ph.D. in something that I read it one day, and I thought, what the hell are you doing, man? It's Intellectual History of Michael Foucault, and I never forgot it because the more I tried to read it, the less I understood what life was about. So anyway, but I know it was a real challenge. But the beauty of it is to meet somebody from Guadalajara. You know, we spoke Spanish, we had a lot in common, and at the same time, I learned a lot from the intellectual life, professional life, PhD, and now you're up in Sonoma State. Forgive me if I mispronounce it because I know you guys are touchy about how we call Sonoma.
Yeah, Sonoma State. Yeah.
So, okay, got that one right. So anyway, Francisco, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure seeing you.
It's always an honor. I'm truly honored. So doing a little bit of math, so we've known each other for almost 50 years.
Wow. Yes.
I look just as good. You look a little older, pero I still look good.
It's the beard.
So I want to thank you for being down here. You're visiting Southern California with your beautiful wife, Rosa, and here to see your kids as well. So thank you. So let's go back. I'd like to cover your background, and let's take you back. How did you end up from Guadalajara to a real tough neighborhood, Banning, you know, going through high school in a time right before the 70s? And then going on to college. I mean, back then, a Latino PhD was unheard of. How did that happen?
Well, I don't know where to start specifically, but as you know, because you live there too, I lived in Tijuana. And, well, my parents couldn't really find their place. So from the time that I was 5 years old, we kept moving between the United States and Mexico every year for 10 years.
Wow.
So when I was 5, we moved to Cheyenne, Wyoming, because we had family there. My mother was born in Colorado, actually. And then, so it was Cheyenne, Guadalajara, Cheyenne, Guadalajara, Denver, Guadalajara, and then we tried the opposite side on the coast, then Tijuana, and then Duarte here in Southern California, and then back to Tijuana, and then Monrovia and Azusa, and then back to Tijuana. And that trip was a big sore point for my family because my father had just bought a house in Azusa. He had bought furniture for the house, and he felt that we were on our way up, but I felt that I was becoming so alienated, that I was becoming somebody different than who I was. And partly was because of the school in Azusa. I was being treated in some classes like an idiot savant, and in other classes just like an idiot. And I was not used to being in that role because I was always a good student in Mexico. And and I think started affecting me psychologically. But because I read a lot, I diagnosed myself as, you know, just becoming some kind of schizophrenic. I could also, you know, almost feel myself becoming somebody else that was very aggressive. And I got into a lot of fights. I mean, I was a real nerdy kid, and all of a sudden, I'm getting into fights almost every day. And then I started ditching school, which, you know, I never done that in my life. So I kind of worked on my mother, and she worked on my father, and we moved back to Tijuana. And then my father, you know, he stayed here, so he kind of, you know, it was a big burden for the family. My father, we would go visit and start telling me all the beautiful things here, trying to convince me to come back. And we did come back this time to Wilmington, you know, which I call the waiting room before you move up to East LA.
That's a rough neighborhood. I don't know about now, but back then Wilmington was,
well, you know,
South LA.
We're so working class, you know, that I think my father and mother had like a third grade education. And so my father was working at that time in a ceramic factory in Wilmington or in Compton, I think. And we lived actually not even in the barrio. We lived in the African American area.
That was the predominant area.
We couldn't even afford to live in the barrio.
It was too expensive.
Yeah, it was too expensive. So we lived in the ghetto, right? And but you know, going through those times is like you don't really see it as being. Or I thought like it was a move up because in Tijuana the streets were not paved. In the ghetto, they were paved. So we were kind of, you know, it was good, you know. But, you know, the one thing in my mind, I mean, I learned how to read and write when I was 5 years old. And
in Spanish?
In Spanish.
Because Spanish is easy to read.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah,
you read it phonetically.
Right. And then what my mother called a vice is that I would read anything I could get my hands on. So, and then I was told from early on in my life that I was destined to be a doctor, a medical doctor, because I had been ordered to be a doctor by the doctor who delivered me when I was born. And so I always assumed that when I grew up I was going to be a doctor. So I never really thought about how I was going to do it or how I was going to get there. I just figured someday it's going to happen. So when I went to school in Wilmington, in Banning High, they gave me my regular classes, and they were wood shop and mechanics and, you know, just light stuff. And I went to the principal's office and I said, I'm going to be a doctor. I want biology, I want chemistry, I want geometry. I don't want these other classes. And so I kind of, you know, had to make my way, you know, doing that. And so I graduated with honors from high school and got into UCLA. But you know, it was kind of like in a daze. I mean, like I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just doing it, you know. Like,
Ignorance
you know,
was bliss, and it was in your favor. It's just doing it.
But you know, my counselor had a difficult time with me because she kept telling me that I was considered underprivileged, and therefore I qualified for all these scholarships. And I was very offended. You know, like I didn't like to be considered underprivileged. I didn't consider myself underprivileged, you know. So she had a hard time explaining to me that I could qualify for these grants.
It was in your favor. She was trying to
favor.
tell
She
you.
was trying to help me, and you know, I'm refusing to help. But you know, at that time in 1967, I graduated early to go to UCLA in the spring of '68. There were only 70 students, Latino, Mexican Americans at UCLA. So at Claremont, where I ended up going to Claremont Men's, because my PE teacher said, you should go to a place where they have small classes because your accent your English is still a little shaky, so you should go to where they can pay more attention to you. Little did I know that it was a bunch of right-wing Republicans going there. He didn't tell me that part.
Very, very, very right.
Yeah. But I did end up in Claremont, and that was the first year of all of the Claremont colleges accepting minorities. Before that, they claimed that they couldn't find any qualified minorities. And I paid a big price for my good grades, you know. I got in to Claremont Men's College through the regular admission process, while most of my other fellow Latinos, Chicano, Mexican Americans, and also African Americans, Native American Indians that were accepted, they were part of a special program funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. Yeah. You were one of them.
I was the second group. Yeah.
So they got a monthly stipend of $30, and they got everything paid, and I didn't.
But you were not underprivileged
but
minority.
I was not underprivileged. So that's a long story of how I ended up in Claremont. You know, actually, before high school, I went to ESL classes in San Pedro because, believe it or not, there were no ESL classes in Wilmington. So we had to take the bus to San Pedro. And when I first wanted to go to school in San Pedro, they did not let me because we didn't have any papers. Even though my mother is an American citizen, somehow we were here illegally, and they wouldn't let me enroll in school because I didn't have any papers. That was the law back then in 1964. So I told my dad, bring me some books on philosophy from Tijuana. So I spent my days in Banning Park reading philosophy. So when I got into junior high, I was already reading level 12 in the ninth grade. But it was just, to me, it was very natural to just read and study and ask questions and everything.
Now, being that we were in Guadalajara, if I remember correctly, you also had a family member who was a seminarian?
Yes.
Who was ex-seminary. Mm-hmm. So you had people around you that, you know, had schooling, and I'm sure that had an impact on you.
Yes. Yeah, that was my grandfather who was a patriarch, you know.
Right.
All school patriarch. All he had to do was look at you.
And you knew you were going to get zapped.
Yeah, just one look. Yeah, he was actually born in 1898. So he was born in the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century. And he ruled the family as a patriarch. And I was lucky or unlucky, depending on what time you remember.
As a youth, that was tough.
Living with my grandparents, living with him, and he taught me how to do that kind of writing that they did back in the 19th century, you know, very nice calligraphy kind of writing. And he was the one that got me to read not only magazines and comic books, which I love, but entire books. Like the first time that I read, I remember it was Kon-Tiki by Heyerdahl, you know, famous book. That was the first book I read from cover to cover. And so yeah, he was basically the biggest influence in my life, you know, intellectually.
You're at Claremont now, going through the process. Now, you know, we're looking at the Vietnam War, we're looking at, you know, Chicano Movimiento in Los Angeles and elsewhere. Then we got the Watts riots, and all this is going on while you were in college. You know, how did you deal with that? You were here in a way, a bubble of this academia world, and at the same time you're hearing about all this going on in the community. How did that impact you?
Yeah. Well, you know, I went through a metamorphosis during that time because, you know, my family was working class. My father in Tijuana was a taxi driver. In Guadalajara, he was a bus driver. Psychologically or mentally, somehow we thought we were middle class. even though we were working class. But just in terms of aspirations, or at least myself, but also my father was very petit bourgeois. Instead of, even though he was working class, his mentality was very petit bourgeois. So he was more like, he kind of believed in the Horatio Alger story. You know, like you put yourself in the bootstrap. You don't accept any help from anybody. You do it all yourself, and you know you're gonna be a strong man, macho, and anybody who doesn't do that is because they don't work hard enough. So it was that's where I was coming from, you know, and you know my grandparents in Guadalajara itself is very conservative.
Yes.
A very conservative city.
Yes.
And my family was very conservative, very strongly Catholic conservative family. And I remember driving around in Wilmington and seeing, you know, people boycotting a Safeway, you know, for the Cesar Chavez, the grapes. Right. And my father saying, you know, those people are just a bunch of lazy people. They just don't want to work. You know, that was his explanation. So that's what I mean by very petit bourgeois. Even though he himself was just a manual worker working in his own factory, but not really conscious of his status as a worker. Okay, and of course I was just following, you know, his steps up to that point. But I always believed at that point that whoever did that, if I could do it, then anybody could do it, right? So I kind of looked down on people that didn't measure up to what I was doing. When I got to Claremont, I ran into Chicanos from East LA. And then I started taking, well, then we fought to have Chicano studies. So in that 1 year from 1968 to 1969, I was basically, my whole psychology changed because I became aware of the social conditions that affect people. And then more and more I was awakening to the racism against Mexicans in this country, which, you know, I'd never been exposed to, so I never saw it. You know, I just took it and it just kind of washed off me. But the more I learned, the more I read about history, then it became very clear that there are a lot of structural reasons why some people, no matter how hard they work, they're really not able to make it, but it's not their fault, right? It's the social conditions, government policy, economic policy, etc.
They're set up to fail.
Yeah, and you know, and then also becoming, you know, more consciously proud of being working class, having a background, a heritage, an indigenous heritage, which, you know, being born in Guadalajara and an urban setting, we look down on Indians. I mean, that's, you know, that's just a fact, you know. And so I became very conscious of my Indian heritage, and basically became a Chicano in that 1 year. And then in '69, I think, when you entered Claremont, again, without my really knowing what I was doing, but some of the more active Chicanos there had gotten money to make a trip to Denver, Colorado, for the first Chicano Youth Conference,
the Corky Gonzalez
Conference. And, you know, that was basically, that was it. You know, that's really the ultimate phase of my transformation, because then, I mean, and then in the 1960s, you felt that revolution was right there, that you could just make revolution happen.
It was all around us.
Yeah.
Not on campus, but it was all around us.
You know, if anybody, when I was in Denver, Colorado, with, you know, 2,000 young Chicanos, if they would have put a rifle in my hand and said, okay, now we're going to fight it out with, you know, whoever, and this is the revolution we just started, I would have done, you know, because that was the feeling of the 60s.
Now let's put a little bit in perspective here so that it all makes sense. Explain Claremont, you know, which even today, you know, 2017, you say Claremont and people look at you like, where's that? You go back east and you say, oh, I go to Claremont, and it's like everybody knows where it is. What is Claremont?
Well, Claremont in some circles is known as the Harvard of the West.
Right.
There are 5 colleges that form some kind of a collective so that you can take classes in either one.
It's a consortium.
Yeah,
of the
consortium.
five, right?
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. And then there's a graduate school there, and it's very expensive, very exclusive, but they did make an effort to reach out and accept more minorities in there, and they did. But I was blown away 2 years ago when the Chicano students there in Claremont Men's, or Claremont McKenna now, it became co-ed, when they actually protested and forced the resignation of one of the deans. And when I was looking at the list of grievances, it blew me away because almost 50 years before, I had presented the same grievances. It's almost like nothing has changed, and it was very disheartening. But at least there's more in terms of numbers.
Yeah.
When I went to Claremont Men's, there was only 4 of us, four Latinos, and then halfway through the first semester, one of the Latinos changed his mind and turned out he was really Hungarian. So there was only 3. Even though his name was Gonzalez or something, but so there was just, I think, throughout the colleges there were only 30 that first year in 1968.
And then I came in with the 69 group.
Right.
And there was about another 30 of us.
Right, but then a lot of them began to drop out too. So
Yeah.
we had, it was, and then our efforts to recruit more students backfired because some students were not ready. And tragically, we were faced with, the Chicano Studies program was faced with a rash of suicides. And so we had to make sure that whoever we were bringing into the college, that they were actually psychologically prepared. And the environment in Claremont was very racist, the administration was welcoming, but a lot of the students...
Well, the problem on that campus, and may still be there, is the idea is that you were coming out of the barrio full of people, and all of a sudden you were all by yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, you walked through the campus, and it was almost, you'd see one person come across the campus.
Yeah.
And then I remember one incident, and the idea was that I was sitting in a class, and I showed up for the class the second semester, and there was 3 of us sitting there, and I looked around, and I said, "Where's the rest?" He says, "No, this is the class." 3 of us? And I remember the professor would say, "Well, I hope you guys read everything." I said, "Yeah, there's only 3 of us." You have to read something. But it's just the whole idea. Here you are, a friend of mine, I don't know if you remember Jose, he was at UCLA.
Jose, yeah.
And he says, "Oh yeah, I finally got a small class of 200. And I thought, "What?
Yeah.
What do you mean a class of 200? And he said, "I've never heard of such a thing, So the whole idea is that you never know what's going to happen. So you were on the spot.
Yeah.
The spotlight was on you.
Yeah.
And you better had something to say.
Yeah.
And kids were well prepared.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it was definitely demanding. You were on the spot. Yeah.
There was a girl in one class. She was a Japanese princess. I had another one in another class. Her dad ran all Del Monte foods for Europe. I mean, she flew to Europe and back on the weekend. Como just taking a bus down the street. It's like, where am I?
Like you going to East LA.
Yeah, literally. These people were like, oh yeah, they live in dorms everywhere in the world. They've been everywhere in the world. They were only 18. I mean, it was that and much more. I mean, you couldn't keep up with these people.
Right. But my welcoming into the dorm that I lived in, that I ended up in my first semester, was Burger. And the students who lived there were known as the Sons of Burger, or the SOBs. And the very, very first orientation for the freshmen was learning the song about a Mexican prostitute. So as we were singing the dorm song, which was about a Mexican prostitute, I walked out in protest. And they went after me, and they were trying to force me to go back because I was just a freshman. And it was a very 1950s feeling to the college in Claremont Men's, because the upper class had rights that the underclass didn't have. So seniors and juniors could use the pool hall, but we couldn't. They could have girls in their room, but we couldn't, and only for a few hours, right? As opposed to Harvey Mudd with all of the scientists, where they had privileges to have girls 24 hours a day, but these guys didn't have any girlfriends.
So they spend more time drinking beer than girlfriends.
Well, no, they spent more time doing their math. They were, they were just into nuclear physics and stuff. They were not into,
Yeah.
But anyway, it was that kind of a, 1950s feeling, and then they changed that within 2 years that I was there. But yeah, it was a shock. I mean, it was a cultural shock. But being an immigrant, I was used to that. You know what I mean? Because I've been, in so many different places, that strange things, and being the new guy, it was
one
just
more
like,
place.
just one, this too shall pass, But I ended up being there at the Claremont colleges for 11 years. Kind of a reaction to all of my traveling before that. I did my BA in 4 years, and then I went across the street and got my Ph.D. in 5 years.
I know. Thanks to you, I was right behind you. But by the time I got to my PhD dissertation, my tongue was hanging out already. I was tired of the nail, man. I thought, I don't know how you did it, dude, because you kept right on going.
I was scared. I was just scared. I just felt that it was do or die. I had to finish. And then politically, when I was in the graduate school, the chair of my dissertation committee had I alienated the entire university because he was openly gay and using drugs. Yeah.
Well, we're going to come right back. We're going to do into part 2 right now. So we're going to stop here and give our viewers a chance to rest. And we're going to come back right now with part 2. All right. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. This is part 2, our interview with our friend, our buddy, our compadre from Sonoma State, Francisco Vázquez, Ph.D., crazy Chicano, I call him, but he's moved so many people, he's influenced so many of us, and I'm totally grateful myself, for showing us the ropes and all that. But you are breaking a lot of ground, and you still are. You're still a rabble rouser, no matter where you go. But that's wonderful. So, saying hi to your familia and all that. Thank you very much for being here today. You're in the middle of moving around. Let's continue. This is part 2, and the idea, we were talking about our experiences of being out of the barrio into East Los Angeles and Wilmington, and all of a sudden you're in Claremont, you're in this special bubble, all this is going around. And you decide to go after a PhD. I mean, you've already broken all this ground. The campus is, just looking at you like, where did we get this radical from? And all of a sudden you show up. But the idea is, what made you go after a PhD?
I was told when I was a child that the doctor that delivered me had trouble getting me to breathe. And to make me breathe, he dunked me in hot water and cold water, and then he baptized me in case I died so that I wouldn't go to limbo, according to the Catholic religion back then. And he said, if you live, I want you to be a doctor like me. So I had it in my head from the time I had consciousness of myself that I had to be a doctor. So to me, it was always a given that I had to be a doctor. And given the circumstances, I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it, but I did get a Ford Fellowship to get a PhD. And but I still had my mind set in medical school. So I was going through a PhD in philosophy because that had been my major. As a bachelor, I got my BA in philosophy. And so I was going for a PhD in philosophy, but I got married when I was only a sophomore in college. So I was living my life very quickly, and I had responsibilities. And to tell you the truth, I kind of fainted when I saw blood. So I thought maybe being a medical doctor is not a good idea. So in my mind, I paid my debt to this doctor who brought me to life by saying, I'm going to be a doctor in philosophy, not in medicine, and I hope you're okay with that. But it was a given, for me. That
You knew nothing else.
It was going to be a doctor. I was going to be a doctor no matter what. and it got a little bit dicey because politically, I had to hurry up. I had 5 years to write my dissertation, but I had to do it in 1 year because the chair of my committee got a terminal 1-year contract because he alienated the university. And if he had gone, the other faculty probably would not have let me graduate. So I ended up getting my Ph.D. when I was 28. And it opened a lot of doors for me. I've been teaching since then for over 40 years.
I sort of, I praised you and I cussed you at the same time. I'm telling you this on record. By the time I was 27, I had finished. I was ready to write my dissertation, and I looked in the mirror, and I looked like I was like white. I was like, where have I been? It's like so much work. I don't think I've ever read so much in my life. But I say, but by the same time, it was self-imposed. But you were always my mentor in that area, so I always have to thank you. And God knows how many of us you've sort of pushed us directly and indirectly. And we cuss you, but we love you at the same time, dude. That's a bitch to do, I tell you that, But the idea is, and now sort of as we're getting close to the end of the show, sort of looking back at so much that you've done in your life, and you're still sort of halfway's there, what you're doing. What advice do you have for all of us here, the Chicanada and all our viewers?
Well, I think when people say, what do you teach, I think the love of wisdom, philosophy, love of wisdom, I think is the best pursuit in life, because I think that what I have learned personally out of all of these studies and mostly from interaction with my students and people and being engaged in the Chicano movement and the struggle, is that we all create meaning. We cannot live without creating meaning for our lives, no matter what it is. And I think that no matter how you look at it, life is a struggle, and the meaning in life is in a struggle. And struggle, we were talking about earlier about off the air, we were talking about being Catholic, being raised Catholic, and even if I'm not a practicing Catholic, but a lot of the values of being a Catholic, compassion and caring and charity and all of that, those kinds of human values, they're not just Catholic values, they're human values. The struggle for those values, personally, is what gives me satisfaction and gives me happiness. But the struggle gets really hard. And historically, I'm a historian, and I remember a student told me, the movement is dead. The Chicano movement is dead. And I said, no, there's a rhythm to the movement. Sometimes it's up and sometimes it's down. And just, the struggle for social justice is a movement. And right now we're going through a dark period with the Trump administration. But it's the struggle. We got to keep the struggle going in whatever way we can. And I think that, being trained in community organizing, one of the big lessons I learned is that you can't afford to get burned out. You struggle, then you take a rest, you take care of yourself, and then you continue the struggle in whichever way you can. So you don't have to be a super macho and throw yourself out there and be a martyr and
get run over by every hour of the day to be a big savior.
Yeah, you don't have to be a martyr. Just keep the struggle, keep yourself strong, laugh is important.
Go with your doctor and check your health.
Absolutely. I mean, so many Latinos, especially the men, we have this thing about being a macho and not wanting to go to the doctor, and that's that idea is so dangerous because so many of my friends have died because if they would have caught something on time, they'd still be alive. So yeah, it's a.
You mentioned the difficulty of fighting for a struggle for the mission and all that. What's the opposite of that?
Well, the opposite is nihilism. The idea that life is just too hard and you never win, and you know, las gallinas de arriba siempre cagan a las de abajo, like the song goes. And you know, a pessimistic view is the opposite of that. You know, the idea that is la vida no vale nada, like the Mexican song, you know, Jose Alfredo Jimenez's song. And you know, la vida sí vale mucho, you know, but to just kind of not caring about yourself, not caring about your family, not caring about politics, not caring about, you know, what's going on in your community.
Stick your head in the sand.
Yeah, you know, that,
I don't see anything.
Yeah, I think that's. I think there are moments in your life when you may need to do that.
Sure.
But to escape from reality, whether it's through drugs or alcohol or any other means, and not really face reality, inevitably reality will get you.
So what I'm picking up from you is the idea that living has a responsibility.
Yes.
You just don't take up airspace and just say, okay, here I am, and I just enjoy it.
Right.
You have an obligation somehow.
Right. And you know, I mean, if you want to get into a like really hardcore discussion,
can you do that?
you know, I mean, it takes a lot of time. But I mean, some people will argue that there is no. I mean, these are values that we choose to believe. You know, like when we say you have an obligation. Well, the problem is that nobody can actually force you to. Nobody can obligate you to. So it's got to be your own choosing to feel obligated to do.
It's self-imposed obligation.
It's self-imposed, yeah.
Okay.
There is no outside force. There, I say this personally, I don't think that there's a God that's going to punish me if I don't do it. I do it because I care to do it, not because I'm going to be punished if I don't do it.
Well, that's also a childish mentality that somebody's supervising us to get us to do something.
Right.
But we come to the idea that we have a right to our own lives, and we have a right to move it in the direction that we think it's necessary.
Right. Unamuno, my favorite philosopher, said we have to act as if the institutions that we respect are true, not because they're true. In other words, I should obey the law because by obeying the law, I make the law true, not because I'm afraid that I'm going to be punished if I don't obey it.
Here we go. Guy cannot. You can take the guy out of the classroom, but you can't take the classroom out of the guy. You're not going to confuse me. You're not going to catch me in that discussion today or some other day, perhaps. The idea is, as you're looking at other persons and you're saying future generations, what's your word to them, whether it be 10, 20, 50 years from now?
You know, what I see for future generation among my students is that the most precious thing that we have is our attention. You know, I just came across a quote from Ortega, Jose Ortega Gasset, the Spanish philosopher. Tell me where your attention goes, and I'll tell you who you are. And there's so many ways to rob us of our attention, you know. And if you're not paying attention, then you don't really know what's going on. You're living in some kind of a fantasy world, some kind of Twilight Zone world. And so guard your attention. Guard your attention.
Be conscious of your moment.
Yeah.
Know where you're mentally going with that idea.
Yeah.
And this is, and you know, we're talking 50, 100, 200 years from now. It's probably going to be the same problem.
Well, I think, you know, the reason why in the future people are afraid that robots are going to take over is because robots can't pay attention. Robots don't get distracted. Humans, we get distracted. And so what the machines have over us is that you program them and they just keep on going. And, I mean, they fail too, but not the same way that we do.
But then it has the argument on the other side is that now we're free to be creative. We're free to sort of follow our whims because we don't have to be held to the drudgery of every day doing the same thing every day.
Right.
So you sort of comes with it too.
Exactly.
But it comes with a greater responsibility to do more with your life.
Right.
But you can give that up also.
Yes.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been here in discussion with Francisco Vázquez. And I just honor everything you've done. I think a lot of us, more than you could possibly imagine, we're very thankful to what you've done for us. You've set the pace. And since you're only halfway through your career, I'm expecting more writing from you, more production from you, more to continue the struggle, so that keep sharing with us what we can do also to be productive individuals. But you've done so much for us. I want to thank you.
Well, I thank you for all your good advice and your direction, and I learned so much from you too. Absolutely.
Todavía, we're just as crazy. Let's keep it going.
Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I'm Armando F. Sanchez, Armando F. Sanchez Productions. I want to thank also behind the camera here, Mr. Kurt Hahn, S3 Productions, CEO, and another guy who's a little off. He does all these crazy programs, and I really love it. And again, thank you for being here with us today. Adios.